Hello and welcome to the very first episode of Politics Unplugged. My name is Toby Joshua and this is a podcast which is going to be going out live in the UK in the evenings every single day, starting today, Monday the 23rd of March 2020, and this will be available every single day. So the basic idea of this is obviously politics is very hard to follow. UK politics, it is a mess. There is always a lot going on. There's always a lot of shouting and a lot of conflicting views, and this is going to be a completely impartial, basically update for you each day, where I'm going to be here and I'm going to have collated all the big talking points from UK politics on that day and take you through them in a succinct, calm, collected, balanced way. We'll hear all perspectives and basically just provide you with the information for you to make up your own mind, so you don't have to bother swarming through different opinionated news sources and the swathes of fake news. You just get a slightly light-hearted, balanced look at what's going on, and from there you have the analysis. You can see the different opinionated shades of mainstream media. You can see what the opinion formers are saying and watch the interviews with that knowledge, and you can go out into the world with all that knowledge and be like, yeah, I know what's going on here. I fully understand this situation. Because realistically, the only reason people don't tend to know about these things often is because they're busy, they're living their lives, and they can't be bothered to trawl through 5 different news sources. That's what we're going to be doing. So I'm Toby Joshua, and welcome to episode 1 of Politics Unwrapped for Monday, whether you're listening live or listening at any other point, for Monday the 23rd of March 2020. Now, we are doing this quite late on Monday, and the reason for that is because there have been a lot of developments today. Now, the lockdown is obviously the elephant in the room, and we'll be getting onto that last, because there is a lot to unpack. So, scrolling right up front to the first thing we want to talk about, Matt Hancock, the government's health secretary, has said that people not listening to government advice are selfish, and ministers, regarding the pandemic, and ministers will have to take further action if they keep being flouted. This was earlier in the day. The UK death toll, as of earlier in the day, was 335, and 1.5 vulnerable people are now on total lockdown. So this was earlier in the day, and the measures were ramped up. We obviously had all weekend very strong advice to practice proper social distancing and all those measures that were in place, and there was a lot of rhetoric coming from the government basically saying, stay in or we're going to take more measures, and we saw a lot of examples of that not being listened to and people blatantly ignoring it in some cases and acting very irresponsibly. Obviously, our advice here is listen to the government. Matt Hancock also acknowledged the NHS is facing some challenges. We have had different members of the Tory camp saying it's not, and now we have definitive, yes, it is facing challenges. This is acknowledged by everyone regarding supplies of personal protective equipment for tackling this situation, and is buying and shipping millions of masks and other protective forms of personal protective equipment to staff in the NHS, and they say this is being taken seriously. So all we're seeing here is the government is basically stepping up. They said they'd spend whatever was necessary. They said they would take whatever measures were necessary, and now they are stepping up to the plate. It appears that obviously critics are saying, well, if you'd had a different funding model and funded the health service better previously, we wouldn't be struggling to cope with this. And then obviously, on the other side, people are saying, yes, this government is doing the best possible thing they could be doing. Don't make this a partisan thing. Cuts were necessary or the economy would have imploded, etc., etc., etc. So there's obviously that whole argument, and people stand on different sides of that. But what we do agree on right now is that the government is doing clearly everything it possibly can do, and is obviously was under a lot of fire for not initiating a full lockdown like many other European countries. and basically sort of being quite ambiguous and treading towards more sort of libertarian ideals in terms of, we're liberal, you do what you want, please listen to us, sort of thing. Earlier, the government was passing this 329-page emergency bill for tackling the pandemic. Because obviously all the politics in the UK at the moment, it's all about COVID-19 and allowing Her Majesty's government the ability to take, quote, extraordinary measures not known in peacetime Britain. So this is basically, it will pass. There'll be pressure groups here and there, but it will pass, and it has passed, I believe, because obviously the government has a huge majority. And no one's really going to oppose that, even if the government didn't have a majority. People criticise here and there and tack amendments on and everything, as the opposition is doing with everything at the moment. But the measures are to allow the government to infringe on certain liberties and enforce certain guidelines, which normally the government can't go, you can't leave your house for no good reason, and there are safeguards in place to prevent that, as we are in a liberal democracy. But in these situations, extremely harsh measures are being permitted, and there are going to be powers given to different services to enforce these measures if people are not compliant. Which is simply, like it or lump it, it is, love it or loathe it, it's how these things are tackled, and the whole aim is to save lives. Jonathan Ashworth, the Shadow Health Secretary, and the opposition in general, earlier on, over the weekend, were insisting, yes, we agree with all this. It's the full blurb. They always say, yes, we agree with all this. And the government seemed to be doing a lot of the things the opposition are asking them to do just after they're asked to do it. It's obviously generally would be a coincidence, but pressure is happening, and then the government's like, yes, we need to do this. So they were saying we need to move to enforced social distancing, quote. So basically, a full lockdown. Now, delving in to the details of this bill, I'll talk you through it now. So there are 87 clauses, and it gives the government wide-ranging powers, unlike any other recent legislation that would come to mind. So Matt Hancock has stressed that the powers in the bill would only be used when strictly necessary, and would remain in force only for as long as required to respond to the crisis. Which is basically the idea. Yes, it's going in for 6 months, and then it will be under review, and there's all these different timescales being thrown in, but it doesn't mean they're going to be enforced for that timescale. It could be less, it could be more. It just gives the government the ability to do things if they want to do it, and these things are being questioned in different quarters, but broadly, people are supportive of this. So taking you through what these clauses and what this bill means, looking at the workforce. So speaking in the Commons, Matt Hancock said 7,563 recently retired clinicians had so far answered the call to return to work to help with the emergency. He told MPs that the returnees included nurses, midwives, paramedics and social workers, adding that the priority would be given to ensure their training was up to date and they were fully insured. On other things, there are multiple sections aimed at reducing the pressure on other frontline sectors, all about easing pressure. So, for example, by relaxing rules around detention under mental health laws and increasing the use of audio and video links in courts. This category of measures shows just how wide the subject matters range. Organisations could be required to provide space or resources for the storage or management of dead bodies, while rules relating to investigatory procedures will be relaxed while the law is in force. Next thing, limiting contact, the obvious one. So this is one of the more high-profile measures, and it is the power to restrict events and forcibly shut down premises such as pubs, which obviously the state couldn't normally do without reason. On Friday evening, the Prime Minister told pubs to close, as we know, along with other places where people gather in the same space. He did not go into detail on to what extent this would be enforced, but this bill will make the power of the state on this matter clear. So if UK and devolved ministers decide an event or venue poses a threat to public health, the owner of a venue or an organiser of the event can be forced to cancel, close down, or restrict access. And the immediate thing that springs to mind if they don't do that is a very, very hefty fine. Borders-wise, once the bill passes, officials will have the power to close the borders in the event that the border force is under intense pressure due to staffing shortages. It also puts into law powers to isolate or detain individuals who are judged to be a risk to containing the spread of COVID-19, whether they want that to happen or not. On sick pay, there's been pressure on the government, obviously, to help workers in various different guises that might not get the help they need or are going to be struggling during this crisis or during any form of shutdown. So the bill will allow employers to reclaim statutory sick pay funds from from HMRC to help with the burden of increased staff absence. For workers, it will scrap the 3-day waiting period so that they can receive the payments from the day they stop working. It's basically rushing through all these things. Following pressure from Tory MPs, Matt Hancock has said the bill would be debated and voted on every 6 months to ensure Parliament was content with its continuation. So, as the situation develops, do we need this anymore? Are we happy with this? Do we keep this in place just in case a threat returns, etc., etc., depending on what the developments are, because we have no idea of the timescale of this whole thing. It could be very short, it could be very long, is the only way to put it, really. The only thing we can do is listen to government advice. So a succession of Conservative MPs have welcomed that move, but sought assurances that the measures would only apply to fighting the virus, not restricting anything else. So Matt Hancock said, yes, these are difficult powers and unprecedented in peacetime, but he said, no matter when, as soon as this threat relinquishes and passes, the measures will be relinquished and set down immediately. Tom Tugendhat expressed concern that the powers could, in different circumstances, be used in a malicious fashion. And David Davis, former Brexit negotiator, sought reassurances that individual elements of the bill could be removed if they were not working as intended. Steve Baker called for a sunset clause when the bill would automatically expire, of 1 rather than 2 years. This is obviously all, in many ways, procedural. We're not looking at a lockdown for 2 years, obviously. Will anything be changed in this? Jonathan Ashworth has said, no MPs came into this House to give powers of this kind to the executive, curtailing some of the basic freedoms our forebears fought for and we take for granted. So Labour says they believe unprecedented measures were now needed to save lives and protect our communities. Jonathan Ashworth said measures would chill every Liberal in the House, and it only offered its support with a heavy heart. So the opposition aren't opposing this. He said the bill needed careful scrutiny, and it was quite extraordinary, and it shouldn't be abused. And the mental health sectioning and provision of social care changes are raising concerns. He said this bill would give councils the power to downgrade care for the disabled and the elderly, and this should be subject to an urgent review by the Equalities and Human Rights Commission. So, councils should be able to prioritise those with the greatest needs in event of staff shortages. He says what no one of us wants to see is the legal minimum of support become the default. So all basically the standard lines of concern for the Labour Party here. And this will all come into force. It will have to pass through the House of Lords once it has cleared the Commons. The government has no majority in the Lords, so peers could obviously cause problems if they want to make changes to the bill. And if they do, that would probably happen on Wednesday at report stage. There's a lot of procedure here. You don't need to remember all of this sort of blurb. It's just the bare minimum we need to know on this. It would then return to MPs on Thursday. Either way, it should be signed into law by the end of Thursday, so well before the end of the week, giving ministers powers that would be unprecedented in modern times and to demonstrate we truly are living in true political turmoil as we launch this podcast, which obviously we're not pleased about. It's just the fact. I don't think anyone's particularly pleased about this situation, but it's what needs to happen. Now, the elephant in the room. So the Prime Minister chaired another meeting of Cobra, the emergency meeting system that they have in place, with all the important people gathering and setting the world to rights, having very high stress deliberations over what to do, what the strategy should do, basically stuff that affects all of our lives and the entire country. And they've now announced, without really saying the word, but that's how it's being reported in media, they just didn't say it in the Prime Minister's address, Prime Minister Boris Johnson addressed the nation and announced a full UK lockdown for 3 weeks, after which those measures will be reviewed. So it's 3 weeks in lockdown. I'll be going into the details of that in a moment, after which the measures will be reviewed. And it was clear something was going on because the standard 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock briefing was cancelled, and it was an address to the nation at 8:30 in the evening, bang on time, sat at the desk, all very urgent, very serious. So, I'll take you through this before we wrap up. So, this is huge. Strict new curbs on life in the UK have been initiated to tackle the spread of coronavirus. So, from this evening, on Monday, people must stay at home except for shopping for basic necessities, for daily exercise, for any medical need, and travelling to and from what would be defined as essential work. You need to look at the government website for all the details on this, and this is enforced. This is not optional. This has been enforced because people, in many cases, weren't following the advice. It's now going to be legally enforced. Shops selling non-essential goods are being told to shut, and gatherings in public of more than 2 people who do not happen to live together are to be prohibited. The UK death toll is, as we say, at 335. This is quite serious. If people do not follow the rules, police will have the powers to enforce them, including through fines and dispersing gatherings through force, Boris Johnson said in a televised statement from Downing Street. Other premises to close include libraries, playgrounds and outdoor gyms, and places of worship. Parks will remain open for exercise, but gatherings will be forbidden and dispersed. The government is also stopping all social events. This isn't an option, including weddings, baptisms, and other ceremonies of any kind, but funerals will be allowed as an exception. Mr. Johnson said the restrictions would be kept under constant review, and in 3 weeks it will obviously be fully reviewed and they'll either be lifted or continued. He says, "We will look again in 3 weeks and relax them if the evidence shows we are able to." Martin Hewitt, chair of the National Police Chiefs Council, said the new restrictions were sensible. This is what he said. "The majority of people are already making real sacrifices to save lives, and we urge everyone to follow the advice that is designed to keep us all safe. We are working with the government and other agencies to consider how these new rules can be most effectively enforced." And now Ken Marsh, chairman of the Metropolitan Police Federation, said he was already seeing large amounts of sickness among officers across London, and that enforcing new restrictions with the limitations of the service at the moment would be a real challenge. He says, "We will be dealing with it, but I'm not sure we will have the resources to be able to see it through." Now, Priti Patel, Home Secretary, says, "I know that the coming weeks will be testing for our frontline police officers. I will do everything I can to ensure that they have the resources they need to keep themselves and the public safe." So this is it, right? This is the real deal now. And it starts tonight. So Nicola Sturgeon, Scotland's First Minister, said the new restrictions amount to a lockdown and are not done lightly. "I am not going to sugarcoat it in any way," she said. "Coronavirus is the biggest challenge of our lifetimes." Now, Mark Drakeford, the First Minister of Wales, said these are really big changes for us all. "We are making them because of the speed this virus is continuing to spread." Arlene Foster urged people to follow the restrictions, that's First Minister of Northern Ireland, to save lives and protect our hospitals. And Jeremy Corbyn said the measures were the right response, leader of the opposition and Labour leader. He says there now needs to be clear guidance to employers and workers about which workplaces should close, and the government must close the loopholes to give security to all workers, including the self-employed, as well as renters and mortgage holders. Now, the Prime Minister said the measures were necessary to tackle the biggest threat this country has faced for decades. Without a national effort to halt the growth of this virus, there will come a moment when no health service in the world could possibly cope, because there won't be enough ventilators, enough intensive care beds, enough doctors and nurses. As we have seen elsewhere, in other countries that also have fantastic healthcare systems, that is the moment of real danger. To put it simply, if too many people become seriously unwell at this time, the NHS will be unable to handle it, meaning more people are likely to die. Not just from coronavirus, but from other illnesses as well. That's Prime Minister Boris Johnson saying that. And the measures are now in place. And people at the most at-risk groups have begun receiving an NHS text to their phones urging them to stay at home for 12 weeks minimum. A further 46 people have died in England since Sunday, aged between 47 and 105, and all of them with underlying health conditions. There have been 4 deaths in Scotland and 4 deaths in Wales. There have been 83,945 tests to date, and out of that, 6,650 confirmed cases of coronavirus in the UK. Keep up to date with all government advice, stay safe. That's been Politics Unwrapped episode 1, and I, Toby Joshua, will be back with you tomorrow. Thank you.